Hello, everyone.
Happy Thursday, everybody. Season 1, episode 17.
Ooh, we're already at episode 17.
I know.
I know.
It's hard to believe that we've been going for 17 weeks already, man. This seems like we just started this yesterday.
Yeah, and I think we may have taken a break, one of us for a vacation or two, but I think it's been 17 weeks straight.
Yep.
However, now I haven't talked to about this, but I don't think we're going to do one next week. I think we're going to take the holiday off, July 4th.
Yeah,
so
I agree with it. I don't
yeah.
think anybody's going to be watching us on July 4th.
Yeah.
So,
or it might be a special watch Nick launch fireworks or something from a live stream. I don't know. That's a whole other category, right, of the internet. But
I'll tell you what, though, I would, it would be interesting just to do the show to see who the hardcore fans are that log on a July 4th just to take an hour to watch us.
Yeah, I would think that the numbers would be pretty low. I'm just saying.
I'm with you.
So right. I guess today we're going to be talking about this whole concept of the shared nothing logging architecture within Cloud Foundry, and we might even dive into the app autoscaler functionality as well. We have two pretty rock star guests to bring on stage here, and I guess let's just go ahead and do that now. So we have Carson Long and Matthew Kocher here from the Taz and Cloud Foundry teams. I'll unmute you guys here. All right. And just a note, if you're trying to, there's some issues going on with StreamYard with LinkedIn, so we're getting a couple of errors. But if you're having some issues, like try YouTube or the Twitter right now. So hopefully it's coming through there clean. But without further ado, Matthew, do you want to introduce yourself and tell the community who you are, what you do, that type of thing?
Yeah, Matthew Kocher. I'm an engineer on the Cloud Foundry team at VMware these days. I've been working on Cloud Foundry for a long time. I was at Pivotal back in the day, led a bunch of the Cloud Foundry open source runtime teams, and then a couple of years ago stepped into an engineering role and got back to coding, which has been a ton of fun. And these days I work on the observability team for Cloud Foundry and Tanzu Application Service, TPCF, whatever we're calling it this week. And this team works, I work with Carson, so sorry for stealing this, but we work on the logging infrastructure, the metrics infrastructure, and the Taz-specific autoscaler. So the autoscaler that we ship as part of Taz. So we do both open source and closed source stuff with a lot of Cloud Foundry stuff. So yeah.
And you did a talk at Cloud Foundry Day 2024 in New York City too. Decade of contributing to Cloud Foundry. Give us a little bit more information on that. We'll link to your session and your talk that you had, but a decade, man, of contributing to this project. Most people don't even stay at a job for 10 years.
It's been a long time. Learned a lot. So just sort of wanted to. I got prodded by Amelia to like, hey, why don't you give this talk? And I was like, that sounds like a lot of work to think of all these stories and write down all these stories. But it was a fun time sort of trip down memory lane of what have we done? We built a lot of software that a lot of people use and makes people's life better. So it was fun to sort of look back. Highly recommend checking out the video. I know it's posted. I haven't watched it because I have challenges watching myself online, but it was a fun time and a lot of history of like how did we get here as a project and hopefully where are we going.
Yep. We'll put a link to your talk down in the description below for people to go back and watch. It's worth watching. Just to, like I said, most people don't even keep a job for 10 years, and to have 10 years contributing to something that's so important to a lot of companies, that's a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
Carson, your turn.
All right. Hi, community. My name's Carson. I've been a developer in Cloud Foundry since 2019 when I joined Pivotal as an intern. So haven't had quite as much time to build up a decade of experience as Matthew has had, but yeah, since joining in 2019, I've been all in on Cloud Foundry all the way through VMware and now Broadcom. I've mostly worked in the networking, release engineering, and now logging and metrics space, and day-to-day act as a approver for the ARP logging and metrics group and the ARD working group for CFD and CATS, while helping to ship TPCF or Taz as well. So yeah, excited to be here.
It's funny how we went full circle, right? Went from
Mhm.
PCF to TAS, Cloud Foundry to PCF to TAS to now we're back to sort of PCF, right? TPCF. So, well, all I did was come back to you in 2029. So
Yeah.
doing this in 2029, we'll have to have Carson on for this show so he can tell us.
Yeah.
Cloud
I mean,
Foundry.
My decade of experience.
Yeah,
That's right.
Matthew can show him up and say, "Well, I've been here for 20 years." So,
Yeah.
second Carson.
Yeah. The state of Cloud Foundry 2029.
There you go.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. Cool. Let's see here. So I think Carson, I think I first met you. It was Cloud Foundry Day. I want to say Detroit, maybe. Like it was it was the one, like the first like thing we did like post COVID or whatever. Like, the first
2022.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
Yep.
I think you might have even done a talk about some of the stuff we're going to talk about here, or maybe it was more like proposed work at that time, or like early stages work. So I think that's
I
pretty cool
did,
to come
yeah.
full circle.
Mhm.
I guess now 2 years later, time flies, but yeah, kind of crazy.
2 years later. Yeah, it is wild to look back on that. I mean, that was KubeCon CF Day, just seeing the mix of like having a tight cloud Foundry crowd on one side and like the interesting wild west of Kubernetes on the other side was a fun juxtaposition to explore. And
I was waiting
yes,
for a gang fight to break out.
Bosh,
just nerd fight on both sides, right? What's better, Kubernetes or Bosch? One man enters, 2 man enter, 1 man leaves, type of thing. But no violence.
We're all friends, right? Yeah. Okay, yeah, we're gonna get real sidetracked here, real quickly on that thread. Yeah, what are we supposed to be talking about here? Logging, autoscaler. So again,
first,
yes,
we got to go back. I say we start with Carson since he was the last one to talk. Thing we do on the show. Tell us about your first CF push experience or your first CF push memory.
Yes, watch the show. I'm aware. I'm ready. It's my first semi CF push experience, and this is important. Was I used Heroku first? And I worked at a startup while I was in high school. I worked as a full stack engineer there, and we used Heroku to deploy our app. And I loved the experience of the push, but I was constantly frustrated by the lack of options available once you had actually pushed the thing. Hard to scale, expensive, not a lot of visibility into what was going on at the time. And I went from there to another company that deployed straight to the cloud, and I was even more frustrated. So to come back to Pivotal in 2019, or to come to Pivotal in 2019 and experience that Heroku-like push experience, but with vastly more configuration options and a lot more power, I loved it. I was all in. Yeah.
Going back old school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah. So I don't know. I was back in that time. I was a consultant at Pivotal Labs working on consulting projects. And our CEO, Rob Me at the time, pulled me aside and was like, go figure out what this Cloud Foundry thing is. I'm going to give you a week. And like, just sit here. I'll give you somebody to work with because like we don't know how to work by ourselves. So like, here's somebody to work with. He's a new hire. Turned out to be a great person. And we sat there on an iMac downloading the initial version 1 of Cloud Foundry, which didn't even have CCNG, didn't have DEANG. It was the original DEA. And we spun that thing up by hand, one component at a time. And by the end of the week, we could finally, running all these components directly on our Mac, could push a Ruby app and see it run and serve HTTP traffic, which was a really great way to get to learn how all of these pieces work and where they fit together. Now the system has gotten so much larger that it's hard to go through that and just be like, oh, I pushed at that point a DEA, a router, and a cloud controller, and I can push an app. These days, you've got to deploy 15 different things to get to that point. But that was my sort of week-long odyssey of working to getting Cloud Foundry deployed to be able to push a simple app. But once I did, I was really excited about it. I was like, oh, I can see how this all works and see the promise in all of this.
So how far between that did you go to starting to contribute to Cloud Foundry itself?
Pretty soon after that, I met the Cloud Foundry team at VMware down in Palo Alto. That's where they were, where we are again today. A lot of people, and probably within within a month or two, we sort of really sort of digging in and working with the team. And I don't know, I always sort of my like invented the piano key necktie moment was like saying that I really pushed it there as my first sort of thing was to like, we need to get build packs into Cloud Foundry, because Cloud Foundry had been struggling to sort of support all sorts of different language frameworks. And Heroku had done all of the heavy lifting already, and had open sourced build packs. And I was like, we should make it so that we can bring build packs to Cloud Foundry. And so that was my first real sort of contribution, was working with the team to get build packs in, the sort of V1 take a build packs. And that collaboration has worked out really well. The build packs team still works with Heroku, and like it's I think we're both better off for having adopted build packs together. So I think it's a really good success story of how sort of open source works. You know, you steal and then you contribute back and push it forward.
Well, we appreciate that. Build packs is one of the superpowers of Cloud Foundry, so appreciate that coming through.
Yeah, it's interesting to see or hear how it was added to the project too. So
Right.
this is like OG CF talk right now. So that's pretty cool. I'm learning things every day or every week on these episodes. So that's pretty awesome.
All right. Well, you want to lead us off what we're talking about today, Nick?
Yeah. So I guess our primary topic is this concept of a shared nothing logging architecture. And if anyone in the audience, feel free to post your questions while we have everyone on the line. But we would hear a lot about. I guess I was kind of trying to phrase this as like, do you want to scale your Dopplers and traffic controllers down to 0 or something like that? Of some kind of tagline of are you tired of maintaining those? Well, I guess that we now sort of with this new architecture have a way to do that, and we wanted to bring on some folks who know more about it than we do, kind of deep dive into that and kind of talk about some of the inspiration and some of the things that we're trying to achieve with that. And Matthew and I have written a couple of papers or articles throughout the last year or two, I think, as this work has been kind of there's been multiple segments of this work landed different versions of Tanzu application service, and I'm sure that ties into certain Cloud Foundry open source release versions too. So I think as of the our 6.0 release, or you can officially go 0 on the VM resource size or VM resource group for Dopplers and traffic controllers at 0. So it's kind of a big deal for folks who are hitting some scaling limits or just wanting to kind of optimize some traffic there. So that is the concept for today.
Well, and coming from the operations side, having run these, the great thing about Cloud Foundry is that it takes care of logging for the developer. It's nothing that they've got to do. We've got a lot of logs that come from the platform themselves. But when you start getting really big foundations, that can be a lot of infrastructure to take care of all that logging. So I'm very interested in the shared logging, the shared nothing logging. Can't wait for you guys to tell us about it, what the impacts are, benefits, pros. Are there any cons to it? Kick off with Matthew.
All right. So shared nothing is a concept we sort of stole from databases. When databases sort of became distributed databases where you want to store a lot of data, there's one thing of you want to do a query on this data, so you bring all the data together and then you run the query on it. The other concept is what databases come up with shared nothing, where you take that query and you ship it out to where the data is and you run that query where the data is. And we sort of took that concept for logging when we sort of looked at the logging infrastructure and said, we're taking all of these logs and we are shipping these logs to be processed in a central location on the Dopplers and then processed centrally in the traffic controllers and then sent out wherever they're going. And we said, what if we could, instead of sort of having Dopplers and traffic controllers know where logs are going, ship that information of, hey, where do all these logs go, out to every VM, and then let the VM send those logs directly to the destination. And so where the shared nothing name comes from is this idea of, we're going to take all of your syslog drains, all of your metric configuration, we're going to push that out to every VM, and then that VM is going to process the logs and it's going to send them directly to where they're going without going through any shared components. Because as soon as we have those shared components, we end up with these scaling bottlenecks, and customers see this all the time. One app, they'll get some really noisy app, running. They don't have log rate limits enabled, so that app is spewing out a ton of logs. And because there's these shared logging components of Dopplers and traffic controllers, they will eventually get overwhelmed with logs, and then every app in the system starts to see some log loss. It's not just that one app that's generating a ton of loss, but because this infrastructure is shared, it's every app in the system starts to see some amount of log loss. And that it takes a while to hunt down, takes a while to find out what's going on, and makes people sad. And those VMs, those Dopplers and traffic controllers are using a ton of resources to do that. When a log gets produced on a VM, let's say it's a Diego cell, that log then gets sent to a traffic controller that decodes the protobufs. It then looks at the log, it then encodes it in the protobuf again, ships it over to the traffic controller, which does the same thing. So there's a lot of decoding and encoding going on that isn't really adding any value. And so once we get to shared nothing, we have logs being generated on the VM and sent to any syslog drain that the user wants directly. And then our newer feature that we've just added recently is using the OpenTelemetry collector to do the same thing with metrics. So if you want to get metrics out of your Cloud Foundry, you can tell us, hey, how do I want to get metrics? Can you send them to this destination? And we do that over OTLP or a few other supported formats that we're adding over time. So that's a brief overview of shared nothing. The real goal is to not have these things that are hard to scale, that you have to scale, that also have some scalability limits, and have it so that you can log as much as you want, as long as you're willing to pay the bill for your logging provider, which we hear those bills are pretty high. So you may still want to pay attention to how much you're logging for your own reasons, but not because TAS is limiting you to how much you can log.
So I want to say my first question on this is so we had a shared infrastructure. And like I said, when you got to large foundations, that could get fairly large. By putting this on the Diegos, is there an overhead? Do we have to scale up our Diegos? Do we have to consider an overhead? What's the impact on Diegos to have them processed right there on the Diego cell?
There's a little bit of an impact there, especially if you were to say you wanted to send your logs to 10 places, it would take a lot. It would, your Diego cell has to send those logs to 10 different destinations. Usually we see people are sending their logs maybe 2 or 3 places. And so the Diego cell may be doing a little bit more work than it was doing to forward them once to the Dopplers. But we don't see it as being a huge amount of more work on the Diego cell. So there's nothing free in the world. You may need to add some CPU to your Diego cells to take care of this load, but it is CPU that you would have been using somewhere else in the cluster anyways. And so it's not necessary, and it's not, we haven't seen it in practice be a huge load on the system on those Diego cells. We did a bunch of load testing to see hey, is this going to slow down applications? And we don't see it slowing down applications drastically. To a noticeable amount when you're doing any sort of this logging processing on the Diego cells.
So we're talking fractional here. We're not talking, hey, I've got 4 CPUs, 16 gig, having to double that, anything like that. It's fractional increases. That's good to know.
And then Diego scales out pretty wide, so we're not hitting those limits of traffic controller Dopplers anymore too, right? So that's good.
Yeah, and that's a good point, right? So that's the other question. We all know, there's this hard limit of 2 to 1 when it comes to traffic controllers to Dopplers. And of course, once you get up to 40, you can it's no longer effective to scale past that. So maybe we'll direct this to Carson or Matthew, whoever wants to take it. This is going to get rid of that. We're not going to have to worry about Dopplers. Those are going away. So not only are we recovering some infrastructure back by going to shared nothing, but we're actually making the platform a little bit more efficient. Is that correct?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, Dopplers traffic controllers, they suffer from the old M times N network scaling problem. At a certain point, the benefits that you're getting from scaling it out are nullified by the number of connections that you now need to have between all the different VMs, because every traffic controller needs to talk to every Doppler, and then every VM needs to talk to a Doppler. So there's just that number of connections as it grows creates a huge burden on your system that creates that hard cap of scaling. And pushing everything to the VM removes that side of the algorithm and enables you to actually horizontally scale appropriately, as well as those fractional vertical scaling. It's really your call at that point, right? Which is nice.
And I guess kind of the unintended consequence of this is going to improve a little bit on the upgrade cycles, because now we're not having to cycle through traffic controllers and Dopplers, all the memory that we got out there. So we're
Yeah.
cutting that time out from an upgrade
Yeah.
perspective, which I'm sure a lot of PEs are going to be really happy to hear.
Well, I mean, not only that, but too, if you're running on public cloud, you're paying potentially a lot of money for those. So that could
Yep.
we could be looking at some significant cost savings. Or even if you're running like on vSphere on premises, like you could free up some room on your host that might have been at capacity and run get more ability to run more apps, or free up free up some space. So
Keeping that recommended
Yeah.
headwind, so in case of an AZ failure or something like that, keeping that 35% overhead.
Maybe you get your N+1 availability on your vSphere host, so you can actually maybe tolerate an HA failure on your host, not get in a bad spot. But yeah, we definitely ran our host really hot. So yeah, it'd be always, and any time to get back resources is always good. Cool.
Now, there was this concept within the syslog, right? When we were doing syslog before, like within the tiles, that you could go in and you could do some Rainier script to segment those logs, cut out some of the logs that we don't want. Is that still going to be available within Shared Nothing?
So that is still there for system logs. We're still using our syslog, though we're talking about like, hey, how could we merge this all into one OTel collector config? So the Rainier script stuff is still there for the people who really want to do specific processing. But as we look at Shared Nothing, we are starting to think about like, hey, how do we give people more control over these logs? Can we have a drain that's just for these system components that goes just to the syslog destination? Like some people just want their cloud controller logs, or they just want their Go router logs to go to a different place. And so there are some really nice ways to do that with the OTel collector. So once we get logs into OTel collector, we're then going to start looking at like, hey, can we give people the ability to configure their own pipelines that filter those logs or process those logs however they want. So we're seeing this as like, as we get to these next steps to enable a lot more flexibility around routing these logs and processing them. And we're excited to see like once we can expose that, how platform engineers use that and what they want to do, because there's tons of things that people have asked for that they want to be able to do that we can't keep up with. But if we can give you the configuration and give them the configuration and tools to do it, that's sort of the dream there.
Yeah, I think that would be huge because, I mean, we've talked to customers. We've got people out there. Exactly right. They want to split these things up. Maybe they want their UAA logs going to a security-specific endpoint so that the security guys can look at it. They want their MySQL logs going somewhere where their DBAs can take a look at it. So I think that would be huge. And simplifying that process would make a lot of people happy. I mean, let's be honest. The Rainier script that's out there, the VMware Broadcom documentation on it is not the best in the world. And Rainier script can be a little tricky to get into sometimes. So making anything simpler would probably go a long ways to our customer base and the users to get excited about this.
Yep. Yeah. And that Rainier script interface, it's there, but it's a little brittle because it's very dependent on the package of our syslog that's packaged on the stem cell. So every time there's a major stem cell upgrade from Ubuntu, which like we're talking about one now, and Carson's been involved in these conversations, so I should let him talk about it. But like it's brittle there, and we worry like, oh, is that going to break or not? I don't know, Carson, do you want to talk more about the stem cell syslog stuff?
I feel like you covered it pretty well. There's some recent issues with like Noble and the folks over in Atascon who maintain the like our syslog packages that we install, not having published a Noble package yet. Switching to the Ubuntu main our syslog package would result in a few parser packages that would only be used in custom rules being removed. So there's some discussion going on right now, and this is the kind of thing we deal with by having a strong dependency on a stem cell rather than packaging everything in the Bosch release, which is sort of the more Bosch way, right?
Yeah.
Well, and Carson, being you, we've had a conversation on some of the things that we see customers wanting to do with Rainier script, and whether Rainier script is the answer, I don't know, but having a simplified method to do exactly kind of what Matthew talked about, splitting those logs out, sending them to different places, would absolutely be huge. I think, we're going in the right way here. So be interesting. Any of the people that watch this, again, we're going to show up. You got our LinkedIns. If you got questions on this, things you'd like to see, make sure you let us know so we can get those back in so that people can get a good idea. R&D can get a good idea of what they're actually trying to do and what customers really want here. So feel free to reach out to us. Let us know if you're in the comments, or if you're on today, post something in chat. We'll talk about it right now.
Yep. We work on what paying TAS customers want to see in Cloud Foundry. And so we definitely we want to hear what you want, what customers need. I like to poke and prod a little bit and say hey, this is what we want to work on. As engineers, we think this would be a good feature. But it really, when it comes down to it, it doesn't matter what I think is a good feature. It's really about what customers need from Cloud Foundry. So
Gotcha.
Definitely like to hear that. One of my pet features that I keep trying to get a customer to ask for is org and space drains. I think it's one of these things. A lot of customers are binding a given syslog drain to 400 applications, and I'm like, you really just want to say hey, every app in this space drains to this syslog destination, or every app in this organization drains to this other syslog destination, which isn't something you can do today, but we dream them. But we're oh, that'd be really fun to work on. Those kind of things of hey, how do we flexibly route these things? How do we make it easier for operators? Yeah, Nick, go ahead.
That would be something. If I was back in the customer shoes, we had I guess areas of concern of how do we where do we route logs? Do we want all different data classifications, and different some of our apps are more restricted than others. So or
tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 apps.
Or data classification, and maybe we didn't want a certain data type to be available to all devs, only the devs in that org, or that let's call it line of business or whatever, just because of a classification. Or there were some data types that are just it's just general, whatever, anyone can see it type of thing. And it was always this debate of well, it's logs are very useful in troubleshooting, so you need them when everything blows up type of thing. But if you restrict it, then it's only certain people can see part of the picture. So it was a fine balance of we have to restrict based on data classification versus we should have the full picture so that people can start writing queries and find things or not type of thing.
Yeah.
Well, and you heard Matthew say it, right? He's looking for customers to try to give him ammunition to get this feature done. So if you're a customer that said, hey, this is something we really want, but that's just not how Cloud Foundry works, and we're used to it, you need to hit Matthew up, give him your name, let him know that this is something you want, so he's got ammunition to take it up. We do things based on customer feedback. So absolutely let Matthew know.
Yeah.
This is how you get things done.
Yeah. Yeah, we see a lot of we just see a lot of these needs for more flexibly routing this stuff. Well, I think when we talk to platform teams that are running Cloud Foundry, I think they tend to break down into two groups. There's one group that their IT department has said, you're responsible for archiving every log that is ever generated in this system, and they're really struggling to scale Dopplers and traffic controllers and send it to the right places and archive them. And the other group is ones where they said, we don't want to have anything to do with application logs whatsoever. We don't want to see them. We don't want to know they exist. And they tend to have the sort of ignorance of no, we don't even we give you a syslog drain, you send your logs somewhere, you deal with them as an application team. And both of those are valid uses of Cloud Foundry, but it's always interesting you can almost ask a platform team which one are you, and they can identify themselves in those two and be oh, I'm this one, or no, I'm in this camp. And so either way, we need to help you figure out how to either enable your application developers to do this, or do this yourself as the platform team.
And by the way, that first camp, if you're using Splunk loves you guys. If you're doing the first camp, they absolutely love you guys. You're the ones sending their kids to college. So
yeah, those logging backends, it could go crazy. Now, I guess on another note, as we're now VMware by Broadcom, and VCF, the new VCF packaging, Log Insight's still around now. I think it's going to be officially called VCF Ops for logs. Or I'm probably butchering that, but I have tested this with Log
Nick,
Insight.
you're in marketing. You should probably know the answer to that one.
Well, yeah. Whoopsies. But I'm just going to call it Log Insight. That's still a very valid tool that you get out of your VCF entitlement. And it does work with a shared nothing logging architecture. We even tested it out multiple times. So that's something to keep in mind if you're maybe looking to even if it's just a destination to filter out logs before they go to Splunk, that's maybe something to keep in mind, just as an option that you may not even be aware that you have, that we know works together. So just a potential cost saving there.
And if you're one of those customers that is, you're seeing the Splunk bill or the bill for your data back in for where these logs are going to, you want to cut some of those logs out, feel free to reach out to us. We can help you with the Rainier scripting to kind of do that if that's something you want to do, and trim those logs down to things that you only need. But if you're in the first camp and you got to save everything, it's fairly simple, fairly straightforward. Now, the one thing I will ask, so both of you, shared nothing sounds wonderful. What do we got to do to get there? I'm sure there's going to be some changes. There's some caveats that are going to be out there. What's out there if a customer wants to go to shared nothing? What does that entail for them?
Carson, do you want to do it?
No, you go for it. I wanna hear your answer to this.
So shared nothing means that if you get entirely to shared nothing, we want to enable you to shut down Dopplers and traffic controllers, and that means that you need to not have any nozzles getting logs from Cloud Foundry. And so common nozzles that we see out there are the Splunk nozzle. We also have some internal products that we're at VMware that we're starting to move to shared nothing as well. HealthWatch and AppMetrics are two projects that right now are working on moving themselves to shared nothing. Once you get all of those things not using a nozzle, but instead using syslog, then as soon as you have your logs moving over syslog and not over the traffic controllers, there's a checkbox in Cloud Foundry or in CF open source where you can say, hey, I don't want logs don't forward logs to Dopplers. And that means that just metrics are going to Dopplers. And at that point, you'll see a dramatic drop in load on your Dopplers and traffic controllers, and you can scale them down. And then once you've got logs going over syslog, you'll want to then see like, hey, how am I getting metrics out of Cloud Foundry? And metrics, we recently added support, as I talked about, the OTel collector. And so you can give us either in the CF manifest or in the TAS tile, you can say, hey, here's an OTLP destination for all of my metrics, or I want to serve a Prometheus endpoint for metrics on my VMs, and I'll scrape that myself. And then you want to get those metrics flowing to wherever you're archiving those. So whether that's HealthWatch or whether that's some other metric service, Datadog, whatever you happen to be using, you can send those over OTLP to there. And then once you've got your metrics going over shared nothing over OTLP, at that point you can scale Dopplers and traffic controllers down to 0, and you can just take them out of your deployment. And that gets you to this world where you're not worrying about scaling Dopplers and traffic controllers. You're not paying for them anymore, and all your metrics are going over OTLP and your logs are going over syslog. And that's where we want everybody to get to. We know it's going to be a journey. We're doing it ourselves first. So before we tell everybody, hey, we're taking away Dopplers and traffic controllers, we're going through and saying, hey, HealthWatch and AppMetrics, we've got to get our internal products off of the fire hose as well. Our team, Carson and I, we did this first with Logcache. So Logcache used to also be a nozzle, and maybe 2 years ago now said, oh, we're telling people we want to go to syslog. Logcache is going to syslog, and so Logcache, when it gets any logs, those ingress over syslog. It's already moved over to the shared nothing architecture. So it's going to be a journey, but we'll get there.
We got this question from Sean. Love to see Cloud Snail on the line. What's the process look like today if I'm using the Splunk nozzle? Do I have to stand up syslog NG or something else?
Yeah. Today, the state of the art is probably Splunk Connect for syslog. It's SC4S, which is it's sort of a side project of Splunk. They say they officially support it, and it will. I think Nick got us the blog post there. So it's possible to spin up Splunk Connect for syslog. They distribute it as a Docker image, and Splunk supports it, and that will take syslog logs and it'll forward them over Splunk HEC into your Splunk cluster. That works just fine. We've tried it out. We prototyped it to make sure, hey, does this actually work? We are now talking about a feature. So that's there today. You can use it. You can do it today. We're talking about in the future processing logs in the OTel collector as well, which would say instead of logs going out over syslog, we may be able to say logs come into the OTel collector and they go out directly over the Splunk HEC format to your Splunk cluster. And so what we'd like to be able to say is instead of just a metric drain, here's a log drain, and it's in Splunk HEC format. Most log tools out there accept syslog. Splunk is big enough, and they're like, hey, we don't like syslog. We really want you to speak our HTTP event collector format, and so they've pushed back on really supporting syslog. But we today you can do it with Splunk Connect for syslog, and in the future you will likely be able to do it through the OTel collector directly, and we'll just be able to forward it right to Splunk there.
I've got a ton of other questions, but before I start asking them, Nick, I don't want to hog all the time. Anything before I jump into some of my other questions?
I was just say I was looking at the date of this article, which is now a little over a year ago now, May 23rd, 2023. We had a bit of the fire hose is out syslog is in part 2 on Tanzu Tech Zone, where we kind of dove into configuring this with Log Insight and Splunk. So just what Matthew was talking about, that there's a little bit of documentation in blog there to see how that would work. Obviously, I don't know. Maybe that was like a TAS 4.0 release cycle. I don't know. It feels like forever ago. So maybe there's a little updating to do to that blog. But if you're interested in that, there's a little bit of a intro to get you started, and then I'm curious excited to hear how we're progressing with this to make it even easier. So
those links are hard to find, so I know they'll be in the show notes. So please check them out there.
Exactly.
I know I've tried searching for them before with all of our migrations of blogs and websites. It's been
I think I'm gonna need to pull these to my personal blog too and keep it for safety.
Well, Nick knows what I'm going to ask. Make sure I get those. We'll get them in the show notes.
Yep.
But, so the with no fire hose going on, we do have customers out there that are using some of the community things like Kafka nozzles and things of that nature. Those are all going to have to be migrated before you can fully get over. So, I'm curious as to what the community thinks. Is that going to be, a difficult process for them? Now, this question may not be able to be answered by anybody on this, but if you're say a Tanzu observability customer, I don't believe that uses a nozzle today, which means that we could possibly get some of the things from metrics, which would be able to cut that out. You can replicate kind of the health watch on TO or Tanzu for observability. So that's 2 of the portions that we've got, but we're working, if I heard you right, we're working to take those actual tiles themselves and convert them over. So you don't have to be a TO customer to get onto that. Is that correct?
Yeah, we are working to convert all those tiles. I believe the TO tile has a nozzle hidden inside of it as well, and I think it's something we'll also need to be converting over. But we're starting. We see most TAS customers, TPCF customers, they're using HealthWatch, they're using app metrics. There are like TO is there as well, but TO will need to also have that nozzle swapped out for syslog, which we're gonna get to.
Yeah, I know a lot of PEs that if you take HealthWatch away from them, they're going to revolt. So definitely want to get that done. So as we're talking about getting this way, so it's there with 6.0. We're going to see it. How long do y'all plan on supporting the fire hose architecture in conjunction with shared nothing? Is there a time frame that we're looking to kind of deprecate that and remove it from the product?
We don't have a time frame yet. We really want to, I know we know that if we said hey, we're taking this away in the next task release, people would it's not reasonable to take it away in the next release or 2. We really want to convert all the internal uses and make it possible to handle all these use cases, and want it to be pretty clear that hey, this is better than the past system before we announce we're not updating these at any point. So no immediate plans to. We of course we dream of deprecating them, but we know that there are a bunch of users of the fire hose, and we can't just get rid of it.
Gotcha. And because we are Cloud Foundry Weekly, we both talk about the open source side and the commercial side, which is Tanzu platform for Cloud Foundry. Is shared nothing? Is it both open source and commercial? Is that going back into open source as well?
Yep, it is.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I mean, I know SAP in a lot of ways. SAP is ahead of us in adopting it because SAP is running mostly hosted Cloud Foundry instances, and so they have a lot more control over their consumers of logs, and so they're really pushing the shared nothing architecture pretty hard, which is great. It's been really helpful to get their feedback on like, hey, this works, this doesn't, and so it's all there in the open source as well.
Yeah, huge shout out to SAP. These guys do a lot of work on the open source side. We work with them closely. A lot of good stuff coming out. When we put in the show notes for Matthew's talk at Cloud Foundry, we'll also link to some of the other talks that happened, and some of those were from SAP. A lot of good stuff came out of Cloud Foundry Day 2024. So make sure you check the show notes. Go watch those as well. You'll get some good information from that.
Yep. And they're running some big Cloud Foundries too. So I know a lot of our big task customers get a lot of value out of SAP running at that scale and being like, oh, that's running into those things first. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Now, I've got a question. If we were gonna do, I were to start this migration, is there like a stair step process, or like how would one go about this if I'm wanting to go from some of the legacy nozzles to this new architecture? Do I need to do like a multi-step migration? What are your thought process? Or like just like start eliminating nozzles one by one, and then maybe like scaling.
Yep.
Okay.
Just start eliminating nozzles one by one. And we see most users have 2 or 3 nozzles and sort of look at those and be like, oh, how do I not use this nozzle or that nozzle? And that's then once you get down to 0 nozzles, as you decrease those nozzles, you'll see the load on those traffic controllers and Dopplers go down, and so you can start scaling down the resources you've allocated to them. We sort of recommend, keep them warm, keep them at the 50 to 80% CPU. Don't let them, if they're bouncing off 100% CPU, you're probably dropping logs. But as you see that CPU go down, you can reduce the number of them.
Now, would the first step be, I have my existing nozzles, let's add the new shared nothing configuration and start directing traffic that way. And I guess supply changes. So now I'm kind of like temporarily going to both.
Yeah.
And then we pull off the old nozzles and then have that new source be the single source for that data source, I guess.
Yep.
That
exactly.
makes sense.
Yep. You can choose if you want to duplicate logs for a little bit, or if you want to have a logging outage for a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
And like you gotta make your decision there, which one you want.
Yep.
Yeah, I was going to be, follow on to my question. When we see, when we start trying this, hey, we think we got all our nozzles. We click the box to say, quit sending to nozzles, run that in dev, see what breaks, right?
Yep.
Not hard to back that back out and go back to the nozzle infrastructure. We just uncheck the box, reapply. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
And that one of the nice things about the syslog drains is that those do not require a full deploy across all of your Diego cells. There's what we call a binding cache, which caches that, and then so you only have to update 3 VMs in the system to roll out a new syslog drain. You don't have to update all 200 Diego cells to roll out a new syslog drain.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, we got another question from Cloud Snail here. Do we have any data on how moving to shared nothing may allow for larger foundations, scaling to Diegos, anything of that nature?
We think as we look at like Dopplers and traffic controllers, they are this there's always been this like don't have more than 20 and 40 of them rule. And we've occasionally questioned like, is that rule correct or not? But it's definitely, it's been repeated enough times that like people, it's entered the lore. You can't go above 40 and 20. Maybe you can. I've seen it occasionally work okay. But like we definitely know that there are limits there depending on how many nozzles you have. And so we do expect this to be a big component in like, hey, if I want to have 500 or I want to have 1,000 Diego cells, there are a lot of challenges associated with that, but we expect this to reduce one of the known sort of scalability bottlenecks where you would hit the ceiling and not have anywhere to go. And so we do think it's going to allow us to increase that number of Diego cells that foundations can have.
Well, and I mean, when you're talking, so the only real limitations, and there are some out there, but the real limitations I've seen are the traffic controller Dopplers. Once you hit that 20/40 mix, vertical's your only way. But most of the others, I've seen some limits placed on the Foundry based off of, NSXT, if you're running NSXT under. But theoretically on public cloud, there's not a whole lot of limitations that we've got other than do you have the networking space available? But recovering those, those can go in, and I'd have to take a look. I don't remember what the default size is for a traffic controller or a Doppler today, but those are basically just VMs that could roll over into Diego cells.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we see not every customer, but a bunch of used platform teams like are running short on IP addresses, and we'll be like, oh, can you add 3 VMs to do this thing? And they'll be like, that's a huge deal. Like, geez, like I got to find 3 IP addresses in this subnet, and we're like, how hard can it? Like, you're in a private IP address space, right? And like, yeah, well, yes and no.
But you don't understand.
You don't understand.
Yeah. I totally forgot about that until just now, and yeah.
So there will definitely be an aspect of like just getting back those IP addresses is valuable for a bunch of people. And that part's nice. Those ceilings, when we talk about like TAS scalability, this is something I spent some time working on. There isn't something aside from Dopplers and traffic controllers. There isn't much that isn't horizontally scalable within Cloud Foundry. We don't really know where that breaking point is, because like you can't really get past to those sizes where like Diego stops being able to schedule containers. I'm sure those are there once we sort of get there, but we haven't been able to get there. The biggest scalability challenges is that mean time to repair to roll through your cluster, and fix it when something goes wrong, or just when you need to apply a stem cell upgrade because the latest patches come out. So it's really those operability challenges that are going to be the bottleneck to having those larger and larger TAS foundations. And so we want to figure out like, hey, how can we speed this up? I don't see enough people like really digging into max in flight and understand. Like I think the more sort of that case that Nick was describing, where you're running every last ESXi host hot, you have no spare capacity, and so like your max in flight needs to be like 2 Diego cells, otherwise everything is going to fall over. And I'm like, if you had a few spare ESXi hosts, you could up that max in flight to 20 or 30 Diego cells at a time, and you could roll through this cluster in a reasonable half day. But that's not like usually we see like, oh no, I keep my max in flight like at the default, which is pretty conservative, and then it takes 8, 12, 16 hours to roll through a cluster, which is bad in the software patch case, but it's really disastrous in the like my certificate expired case, and how do I get it back? And so there are those things are really what we want to look at when we look at like how big of a Cloud Foundry instance can I have.
Yeah, I would, we're going to go off on a small tangent here, but the max in flight, definitely something you got to play with if you've got the capacity, be it on, either you're running on public cloud, you're running, doing the private cloud. One of the things that we used to do is we would go in as a pre-step to our upgrades, and we would add, say, 30 Diego cells, just empty Diego cells. And then we'd set our max in flight to 30 because we knew we had the overhead for it. That helped us cut our upgrades from really 18 to 23 hours down to, I think it was somewhere around 8 or 9 hours, just by doing that instead of doing the default. There's a lot of things you can do, but make sure you test your max in flight. Make sure you're not doing something that you're, unintended consequences there. So Dobbs, I think 700 to 1,032 gigs is probably the highest. That's higher than anything I've seen. We have seen, again, the only real limitation I've seen has to come with kind of, NSXT and the way the networking's running. So
do you have 1,000 IPs in your VLAN? That is probably the constraint, probably.
Yeah.
Almost everyone. It's just IP space, really.
I mean, TAS scalability is kind of that, end of the universe. Is there an end of the universe? I'm sure there is, but we haven't found it yet, right? So
the end of the universe is you have 0 IPs. Free. And then a shout out to Art. So Carson, yeah, we I guess you didn't get the memo. I can ship you a razor, and you got that nice hair situation going on. It's I guess props to you. But yeah, we got 3 bald guys, 3 bearded guys, and then Carson. So with hair. So I guess thanks for Art. I know he joins frequently, so thanks for watching, listening. He's on my team, and he's been doing a lot of TPCF stuff lately too. So shout out to Art.
Just reminding us all of what we look back in our younger days when we could actually grow hair.
Yeah. And I don't have. Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah, I used to have hair too, but it all fell out.
So auto scaling.
Yes.
That was one topic. Mm-hmm. So that was the last topic we want to get on to. The impacts on auto scaling, what auto scaling is coming up with.
Carson, do you want to talk about auto scaling?
Sure thing.
New stuff here?
Yeah, and to be clear, this is like the TPCF proprietary autoscaler stuff that we've been working on here. And
Correct.
yes, recently we've been adding a number of features to make it more accessible to developers, to make it more powerful for developers. The big one that we're really excited about is CPU entitlement. For a long time, CPU as a
Mhm.
metric has been a little
Mhm.
misunderstood in autoscaler land. And the percentage that you have to set is very difficult to actually read into because it represents the CPU percentage that the any given instance is taking up on the Diego cell as a whole, rather than
Mhm.
versus the entitlement that it is meant to receive. And there's been a number of like CLIs, like the CPU entitlement plugin that you can use to
Mhm.
work around that deficiency. But now we've just gone and built it straight into the system, so you can go ahead and move all of your old CPU rules to CPU entitlement and live in a better world where it makes sense. That's one we're really excited about. And then more recently, we've been working on a cooldown feature, which is pretty standard for a lot of autoscalers out there. Should be familiar to a lot of people. It's the idea that sometimes it actually takes work to scale up or scale down. Like you don't
Mhm.
necessarily want to immediately go and scale up again if you are getting a lot of like high CPU metrics from your staging or from like any startup activities that your app instance has to do. And now you can apply a cooldown period to say, hey, actually, I expect that it may take upwards of several minutes for my application to start up. And during that time, please don't scale me up again. Like let's let the dust settle. Let's see how
Mhm.
the application performs once these new instances have properly started up. And then you can go ahead and scale me up if I'm still under load.
So that would be like a new flag then that we'd set or be configurable, or how would that look? I
Mhm.
guess just like
Yeah.
a timer basically, or
Yeah, it's going to be a property directly on the service binding or like
Mhm.
autoscaling app. So
Mhm.
depending if you're using Apps Manager, you would see a new input field right below the scaling factors and the max min thresholds that would
Mhm.
now let you set a cooldown period in seconds. Right now we're thinking like 0, that's the old behavior. 24 I want to say like 24 hours. Matthew, did we set 1 day or 1 hour is the limit? Is it 1 day?
I think 1 hour, I think is what we
Okay.
maxed out at.
Yeah. We're
So
hoping that your
maximum.
apps,
Yeah, yeah,
take
yeah.
less than an hour to start up. Is our
All right, you got
assumption.
to scale now. Just wait a day and see what
Yeah.
happens.
Well, I mean, so two things, that CPU entitlement, that's huge because literally I probably spend 10%, 15% of my time talking
Mhm.
customers through how CPU works on Cloud Foundry. I've got a
Mhm.
list of docs that I've saved just to send them links, but making that better is going to be hugely beneficial to customers. And even, recommend we kind of update our docs a little bit more to really explain how CPU entitlement works. But the one thing I want to call out, Carson, and I can't remember if this came out in 3.0 or it came out in 4.0. I think it was 3.0, but the ability to step auto scale, right? Auto scaling for us has always been one at a time. The ability to say, okay, if you auto scale by 3 now. That was huge, man. Great work on that. That's something that I've got a lot of customers coming back and saying this is a huge feature for us to be able to scale up by 3, scale down by 1, that sort of stuff. That is huge, especially when you've got customers that are doing something like, scaling on RabbitMQ depth or something like that. When you get behind, you're not going to be able to do that one at a time and catch up. You want to put 3 or 4 out there, let them catch up real quick, and then scale down slowly until you get back. So huge feature, huge thumbs up. Congrats, guys. That was big.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that what we just talked about is very nicely documented in Apps Manager too. So I think everyone's going to appreciate because like on this auto scaling old CPU way. I remember like giving talks in front of rooms of developers. And like, all right, so our Diego cells in this foundation have 16 vCPUs. So if you see a metric from like 400% to 800%, that's what we want to target for scaling. But now it's just like more of this like, like I think the range or like a default range now is like from 30 to 80% of like a human natural like thought process. So I think a lot of people are going to really like this feature. So
Yep.
Yeah.
And Dobbs comes in, his chat got cut off, so I'm going to kind of translate between the two. But what he's looking for is he really wished that there was machine learning in this. Here's the top AI that we want to get to, but use machine learning to kind of figure out when we want to change that base. Is there anything that you guys have in roadmap or plan? Is this something you're looking at? AI is taking over the world, right? So where can we use AI in everything?
Yeah, it's something we've talked about. The challenge we encounter when we go down that path is we don't built into Taz, we don't have a long-term metric store to go do some real deep learning about like, hey, what historically does this app do when when traffic increases or when we adjust the parameters for the app. And so it's something we've talked about. It's definitely something we're hearing about and saying like, oh, how do we do that? But it's going to be it's a big change, not a small change to figure that one out. But it's definitely, people are sort of like saying, hey, how could this be easier for users to just be like, hey, I just want it to handle it for me. So
that's what I love about AI is, we're kind of getting, hey, I don't want to do stuff anymore. Just, here's all my information. Go figure out when I should do stuff and do it for me.
Well, I would say please don't use any of the generative AI demo apps we've used to try to do any of this. You want to look at your auto scaling rules and make this decision based on your business needs. But yeah.
Well, and when it comes to auto scaling, I do think that what Dobbs said is right. I don't think a lot of developers really truly understand auto scaling. They just go in and they throw out this one size fits all. If my CPU or my memory gets to this point, scale me, and then they wonder why their apps don't scale. Well, you set the wrong metrics, right? You got to do some testing. You got to do some, load testing to figure out where your app's going. So, auto scaling is not a magic button. You still got to put some work behind it. But once you get it figured out, it works extremely well. But you've got to make sure you know what your app is doing and what you need to scale on and when.
Yeah. The people who get the most out of auto scaling are ones who also can do the load testing on those apps and understand like, hey, how does my app respond when it's under load, and actually see auto scaler take actions, and see, load test to the amount of traffic you're going to get. Don't load test 10x your traffic, but really understand your traffic patterns for the application. And
Yep.
Autoscaler can help you. Autoscaler can save you a bunch of resources by scaling that app down, but it can't save you if you've never load tested to those levels. Autoscaler is probably might help, but it's not something you don't want to. You're not going to sleep too well at night, hopefully, if you haven't load tested your application to the levels that you need to get to, and make sure that your autoscaling config is right. That people will, they'll set their autoscaling to have 100 app instances, but then they'll only have 50 database connections, and so those extra 50 instances just start returning 500s because they can't talk to the database.
Yep.
So like all of that, you really gotta look at it holistically. Autoscaler is a valuable tool, but it's not the only piece in the toolbox there.
And I'll also say, here's my pitch for chaos testing. I don't think enough people do chaos testing. A lot of people will test under heavy load, but what happens when things fail? When I was a PE, I would randomly do this in our dev and test environments. I would just go down and shut down a couple of VMs and wait for developers to start complaining, hey, this ain't working. Cloud Foundry's broken. No, your app's not resilient, right? Let's go back. Here's what I shut down. Here's why it's not. You need to find a way to fix this in your application because, stuff happens. So my little pitch there for chaos testing, make sure you not only test for load, but you test for failure as well.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, we're coming up on time.
Did you get a change ticket for that, Nicky?
Oh, hell no. I own the environment. I when it came to Cloud Foundry and the company I worked for, I was Lord and God. I did whatever I wanted to in test and dev. Now, production, completely different matter.
Yeah.
Would never do that in production.
Yeah, the chaos testing is good, but the chaos testing in prod, it's like, it's nice thought, but no, I don't want to get fired. So
unless you want to retire early and not be working, don't do it in prod. But man, I would do it. I would do it to my devs all the time in dev and tests, especially when I knew that they were doing a performance testing cycle. Go in there and shut some stuff down. They're like, well, you screwed up all our tests. No, your app's still not resilient. You're testing under best circumstances. So devs both loved and hated me because once they got their apps working, then they never had to think about them at night. But during their testing cycles, I got called lots of names.
Yeah. Well, yeah. We should do an episode on that of just random tidbits from the chaos testing.
Absolutely.
All right. So we are coming up on time. Carson, Matthew, do you have any closing thoughts or anything you want to leave our audience or listeners with, or any shout out to plug anything you're working on, that type of thing?
I don't know. I mean, try out Share Nothing. Give us feedback on it. We definitely want to hear like what works for you, what doesn't. We definitely, our newest thing is the Hotel Collector. We want people to try out the Hotel Collector metrics. Let us know how that works. We definitely appreciate any feedback about it.
Carson?
I'll give a shout out to Jovan Kostovsky at SAP. Great working with you, man. You're doing some great stuff.
Awesome.
And I'll remind everybody, again, Matthew asked, does anybody want to do drains on orgs and spaces? Make sure you reach out to me, Nick, or Matthew and say, yes, I'm a customer that wants that. We've got to have ammunition if you want to see that taken forward. So he put the call to action out there. Let's see if somebody answers it.
And if you're watching the show now, maybe at a watch party or something, or listening to it on the podcast, and you want to join the show, we'd love to have you on, especially, if you're a Cloud Foundry contributor, you're a Cloud Foundry user. We'd love to hear your story. We had a great episode, we had a live episode at Cloud Foundry Day where we got some users and contributors all talking together. So if you're listening to the show, please reach out. Let us know. We'd love to get you slotted into the schedule. But just a reminder, we'll be taking a break for the July 4th holiday in the U.S. We do have a lot of international listeners, so it's a holiday for us. And sorry, you'll just have to get caught up on the podcast in our absence. But then also, please, like and subscribe to our channels, like on YouTube and Twitter and LinkedIn. That helps get the reach out, and we're continuing to see a growth in all of our channels. So we appreciate that, and just we'll be here. And I think after the break, our next episode, we'll have Michael Cote and Mia Villarreal joining the show. We'll be we'll have some interesting updates around some studies and things in the cloud native space. So I think that'll be a pretty interesting show as well. So that's
fun to talk to either one of those. And I'll add, we get a lot of feedback, people coming in and telling us, hey man, we really find this show interesting. But, we're coming up with topics. We want to know what you guys want to know about. So if you've got a topic that you want us to drill into, you want us to bring experts on, make sure you reach out to us, either me or Nick personally, or on the Cloud Foundry LinkedIn channel. Send us a message. Tell us the topics that you want to see, and we'll get those out here, because we're doing this for you guys. We're not doing it for us. So if there's something out there that, interests you, or something that you're not quite sure on, let us know, and we'll do a deep dive on it.
All right.
Cool.
Well, are we ready for that? Do you guys did either of you ever watch in the end of the episode? Do you know how we end the episode?
Oh no.
So Carson says he watches, but he doesn't watch to the end. All right.
So one of our listeners started like a CF buy. So we've been ending. I think it was on the first episode. So we've ended every episode now with a CF buy. So we'll count down 3, 2, 1, and then just say CF buy, right? So 3, 2, 1. CF
bye.
Yeah, bye.
See y'all next week.
Yeah.
Wow.
Ending.
Wonder if we're still dancing on screen, waiting for the stream to
Oh, I think we're still live.
end.